Hastily stretching out one of her arms, she picked up her precious cross, casually glanced at the face of a Christ, which strangely resembled that of a foreigner across the table. So this is the face I have been trying to recall. She pressed the cross to her bosom, cast her surprised glance at the customer across the table. The customer, jingling the silver coins, continued watching her with smiling eyes. Almost in a trance, Gold Blossom, resting her head as the dangling jade earrings on his arms, was now ecstatic with blushing cheeks to which his face was coming closer. Whether she would let the strange foreigner have her body or refuse his kissing to avoid giving him her disease was not a question for her at that moment. Burying her lips in his beard, she only felt the surging pleasure of making love and her first burning desire filling her bosom. Just now you heard a part of a short story, The Christ of Nanking, by a renowned writer, Ryunosuke Akutagawa. Even for a Christian who doesn't get offended easily like myself, The Christ of Nanking was something that shocked me at first. The story follows a 15-year-old Christian prostitute who found out she contracted syphilis and out of her kindness stopped having clients, even if it meant losing her entire livelihood. As all of her old customers were gone, one night a foreign man with a strangely familiar face opened the door to her house. No matter how high the price the stranger was offering, the girl kept rejecting the idea to sleep with him, not wanting to pass her disease to another person. However, as the time passed by, she realized that the man looked exactly like a figure of Christ she had on her wall. Being overwhelmed with joy, jumped into the man's embrace. By the end, the story takes a cynical tone. It turns out the man the heroine confused with Jesus was merely a tourist who died sometime after contracting syphilis. Meanwhile, the girl thought she was miraculously healed through her faith. While the Christ of Nanking certainly appears scandalous and would probably be labeled as blasphemy, for me it sparked a realization. So often the act of a god coming to sleep with a mortal was seen as an honor. Times and times again it reappeared in the mythology and folklore of pantheistic religions practiced in Japan for centuries. Just like that, I found myself diving deep in the lore and history of Christianity in the land of the rising sun. One religion that failed to adapt yet left a great influence on art and culture of Japan. Be ready, it is not the same Christianity that you are familiar with, but something so unique only Japanese people could come up with. The Christianity's time in Japan was short but very impactful. Initially as a part of the Age of Exploration, the first encounter with the Western culture happened when the Portuguese landed on the shore of Japan in 1542. Bringing new weapons and knowledge, the Europeans did not intend to spread their faith at first, making the journey strictly trade-centered. Nevertheless, a few years later, future most famous missionary came to Japan to preach, later became known as Saint Francis Xavier. As the leaders of Japan saw a great financial opportunity with new trade partners, Christianity not only was allowed, but also promoted by the powerful feudal lords, as even Oda Nobunaga used the religion to get closer to so-called Western barbarians. But the peace for the foreign ideology could not last forever. Threatened by the growing European influence, the Japanese elites had an abrupt and violent change of mind. Following the closing of the ports to the Westerners, Christianity was outlawed and punished severely. Crucifixions of the 26 believers were the first of numerous tortures among the common people, migrants leading to the formation of Kakkuri Christian, hidden Christians. One of the methods to identify an underground worshipper was fumi-e. To expose the remaining Christians, the officials would make the locals step on an image of Christ, Virgin Mary, this act denouncing their faith. While some chose to become martyrs, many rejected their connection to Christianity and practiced it in secrecy. However, the state was becoming so suspicious of Christians that even artists who created the icons that were labeled too beautiful could risk execution, as the lords believed no one would depict a barbarian god with so much care unless they were true believers. The event that would end Christianity for many centuries was Cimabue rebellion of 1637. Given up upon by their own government and losing their faith in the local gods, who have not changed their faith for generations, the poor converts of the region started an uprising against the local officials who kept introducing prohibitively high taxation on the exhausted population. Like in early Christianity, the people fought against the cruel state, lacking the power but being led by the truth to fight their persecutors. The peasants and the Ronian fought so passionately that even an army of 100,000 troops was struggling to put the rebellion to an end, only being able to stop it with the help of the Dutch. This was the turning point in the history of the Western religion and open trade that became strictly prohibited until the policy of isolation was ended 2 centuries later by an American expedition in 1853, making Japan open its borders again by force. But even with the risk of inhumane tortures, the few surviving Christians of Japan continued to believe in God, practicing the faith in an unbelievable manner. Kakuri Christian, or hidden Christians, is a branch of Christianity that had to adapt to survive. It grew so different from contemporary Christianity that today it is often considered a separate sect from the official doctrine. Centered in Nagasaki, where Christianity was widespread before the ban, the believers had to assimilate within Buddhism to save themselves and pass their tradition to the next generations. The results may shock the Western practitioners, as many symbols of faith were morphed into Buddhist imagery so perfectly it was impossible to tell apart. Probably the most significant of them is the character of Maria Kannon, a mixture of Christian Virgin Mary and Buddhist goddess of mercy Kannon. Both Kannon and Madonna were extremely popular religious figures, representing the infinite kindness, motherly love granted to anyone with an open heart. In contrast to unapproachable almighty warrior gods, these women were down to earth and asked nothing in return, making them the center of attention of the lower classes. When Christianity started being persecuted, the common people were made to participate in Buddhist events and be mandatorily registered at an official local Buddhist temple, rejecting of which was a death sentence to many. In constant fear of being revealed as Christians, the Kakuri Christian had to hide their idols among local religious symbols. Using the image of Kannon, Christians would pray to her sculptures and paintings, hiding the attributes of Mother Mary within. As Buddhism originated in India, many of the visuals also draw from its tradition, not ashamed of a naked body, passionate dance-like poses. While such depiction of the Divine Virgin Mary would certainly disturb many Westerners, to the Japanese Maria Kannon, breastfeeding baby Jesus, was natural and empathetic. Creating Shinto-like shrines at home, Kirishiten would often hide Christian votive images and vials of holy water behind their offerings to their ancestors. Today, the remaining Kakuri Christian still value their traditions, many of which have preserved the rituals and hymns the first Europeans brought centuries ago. Only in the late 19th century, Japanese Christians could reveal themselves as the borders were opened again. Surprisingly, the new wave of Christians did not join Kirishiten. Instead, Progressive, creative, romantic youth would become the forefront of religion in the coming decades. To understand the unique reception of Christianity in the 20th century Meiji era Japan, we need to see how the new arrival of a Western culture has captivated the minds of Japanese locals after the reopening of the borders. For a long time, young people would see the West as purely progressive, contrasting the heavily traditional hierarchy of Japanese life. Young people who pursued education had a very idealistic vision of anything imported. Of course, much of it was never seen before science, technology and education. Christianity was also romanticized. Confused by many conflicts of the 20th century, the youth was struggling to find their place in the world, saw the new religion as an escape from the clashing morals of the contemporary world. Thanks to that trend, today we get to enjoy many masterpieces of classical Japanese literature. While a new and exotic religion would lead to self-exploration, Christianity would often bring even more chaos to the writers' minds. Many young men of the time would feel a great sense of guilt for wanting to dedicate their lives to literature, disregarding the priority of faith. Some were superstitious, fearing that fiction would be judged as harshly as the real deeds. While a new and exotic religion would lead to self-exploration, Christianity would often bring even more chaos to the writers' minds. Many young men of the time would feel a great sense of guilt for wanting to dedicate their lives to literature, disregarding the priority of faith. Some were superstitious, fearing that fiction would be judged as harshly as the real deeds. Others just could not accept their failure to live in a martyr-like life. In 1916, the authority of the Bible, a novelist Arishima Takeo perfectly described this dissonance. I believe the time when the Bible most inspired me was when I was a young man. There is a period in human life when young men are burdened with longing for sex, oppressed with doubts about life. In my mind, the Bible and sexual desires were in bitter conflict. My artistic impulse supported my sexual desires, and my moral impulse the Bible. I did not know how to harmonize my enthusiasm for the two, so I suffered. Shusaku Endo was a pioneer of Christian literature in Japan. Being a Catholic himself, the writer explored his crisis of faith through the lenses of first Christians in Japan. Being familiar with differences between the cultures as he lived and studied abroad, Endo felt like a foreigner in his own religion, describing his faith as a suit of Western clothes that just doesn't fit. In his most renowned works, he tries to understand if Christianity could ever really be understood and accepted in his homeland. Just like Akutagawa, many of his texts explore the twisted psychology of selfless martyrs, examining if such strong passion is merely an obsession or the true way to live. In Endo's Samurai, a countryside man is perplexed why would such powerful nations as Spain worship the image of Jesus. His thin, exhausted, dying face could never convince the Japanese he was the son of a powerful god. Throughout the book, a foreign missionary is being confronted with the impossibility of proving Christ is worth worshipping. In contrast to his religion, Buddhism and Shinto have gods that the Japanese people understand, strong, muscular, covered in armor. Looking at them, you will certainly believe they help to win on the battlefield. A renowned writer, Ryunosuke Akutagawa, is incredibly popular both locally and abroad. However, not many know that Christianity played a huge role in his literary career. Academics divide his fascination with the religion into three stages. Starting with an interest for the foreign, it gradually grew into profound captivation with the psychology and symbolism of a martyrdom. Christianity finally becoming the main topic of his stories. It is obvious that the writer's relation to Christianity changed constantly, as his stories often take different sides when it comes to the faith. In his famous The Smile of Gods, a spirit argues that Christianity cannot integrate in Japan in contrast to Buddhism and Confucianism. The Japanese adapt, bend and transform, but will never allow a foreign policy to conquer them. Other, less-known stories often incorporated Christianity more lightly, describing possible personalities of people who practiced it in Japan. What is clear that the author dedicated a lot of time to properly research its history, and by the end of his life was still interested in Christian philosophy and possibility of existence of higher powers. By the end of the book, it is clear that Christianity won't stay in Japan. But it is not impossible for a foreign religion to grow roots in Japan, as it was proved long ago by Buddhism, which arrived from China and successfully assimilated in a local religion. Having many Buddhas, it already had similarities with the forever growing pantheon of local Shinto. Most of the time, people would choose a deity representing their clan and pray to it, hoping it will return the favor in the battle, political arena, or harvesting. Another huge proponent to Buddhism was its connection to the natural world, deeply appreciated in Japanese culture. Karma could always turn you or someone you loved into an animal in the future life due to their misdoings, just as a human soul could possess an object or a creature in Shinto. However, what was more important to the mind of a Japanese person, anyone could become a mighty Buddha if led a virtuous life. That type of ascension would never work in the Christian hierarchy, distancing both God and Jesus from the common people. Another aspect of Christianity that would confuse essential Japanese, a twisted prohibition of sex. Western readers at first may be perplexed by how many romantic scenes the Japanese classics have and how normalized changing lovers was for the aristocrats. Moreover, not only was it a huge part of the court life, women could not be shamed for changing lovers as much as you would expect. Knowing that part of the culture, it becomes clear why Christianity, with its rigid, ascetic and self-punishing morals, would not become popular among the rich. But there also was another class that benefited from Shinto directly, the royal family. The royals always remained to be the same descendants of the most sacred kami, meaning the emperor has the blood of gods who created that land. Considering the mythology, beliefs and social structure of the country, it is easy to see why the journey of Christ was so foreign to Japan. However, the story of a man who found the strength to resist the state would slowly inspire another demographic, the peasants who saw themselves in Jesus, abandoned and abused, but rewarded for his struggles. In my view, the first wave of Christianity, which also can be seen in the imagery of their objects of worship, was predominantly centered around Virgin Mary, a kind, motherly figure who promised to bring peace and mercy to anyone who comes to her. Meiji era, in contrast, is very masculine in its view of Christianity, the faith that seems to be so punishing towards mere humans. Many texts the writers, not being able to adjust their lives to ascetic morals, fear the wrath of the Old Testament God. In contrast to peasants of the past who had nothing to lose, the young intelligentsia of the 20th century struggled to choose between the hedonistic lifestyle and ethics. In words of Shusaku Endo, one is free to choose whether to accept or reject God. In other words, it is not possible in Catholicism to return to God without fighting Him. Here lies one of the greatest misunderstandings toward Catholicism, the notion that since you have faith and therefore have been saved, it is difficult for you to experience pain. A Catholic always has to fight against himself, against sin, against the devil that leads him to death, even against God. How different it is from the words of Amida Buddha, who promises salvation to anyone who has ever spoken his name. Nowadays, Japan only has 1% of the entire population practicing Christianity. However, as we saw in the literature section, the mysticism and ideas, along with aesthetics, fascinated many creatives throughout the 20th century to today. Having anime as one of the most significant creative forces, Japan still brings Christian themes and visuals into narration. Take, for example, extremely popular franchise Neon Genesis Evangelion. While many designs are heavily referencing Christian lore, the core idea is not so deeply dependent on the doctrine itself. Just like that, many other shows use historical or artistic background as a visual inspiration rather than the ideology. However, it is not always just the picture. Madoka Magica is an anime revolving around fantastical lives of young schoolgirls who, oftentimes against their naivety, were chosen to carry the burden of saving the world from evil creatures born from the sorrows of their predecessors. Full of symbolism, both Christian and Buddhist, the story of the main character strongly reminds us of the ascent of Jesus, the loss the pure-hearted have to live through, and the rebellion of Lucifer, who was not ready to sacrifice his ideals for the greater good. As Madoka, a young naive girl who has never faced hardship, chooses to become an all-forgiving goddess, in return being erased completely from the minds of the ones who knew her in flesh, the second protagonist, Homura, cannot accept it. Having dedicated her life to the mission of saving her closest friend, she tries to bring Madoka back, even if it means damning the souls of thousands of magical girls like her. In the main series, she draws another parallel to the Christian faith in God. Being the only one left who remembers Madoka, she struggles to prove to people that she ever existed, as no factual argument could prove it. Becoming the antagonist by the end of the final movie, she names herself Lucifer, ready to fight to get what she believes to be hers. Whether it is a mere intrigue by the foreign or a deep exploration of the Bible, the evolution of Christianity in Japan remains a small yet significant part of history and culture. The West is mesmerized with the Asian heritage and art, Japan found its own unique ways to appreciate the symbolic and philosophical aspects of Christianity. This video serves as a short overview of Christianity in Japan. During the research, I was absolutely blown away by the amount of amazing stories I found. Let me know what other topics you would like me to explore within Japanese and Asian culture as a whole, and I will surely return with one to you soon.